This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the American Monetary Association's podcast, where we explore how monetary policy impacts the real lives of real people and the action steps necessary to preserve wealth and enhance one's lifestyle.
It is my pleasure to welcome Simon Caron, the Uneducated Economist. How you doing, Simon?
Doing awesome. Thank you very much, Jason, for having me on today. I'm really excited
to speak with you. It is great to have you. And, buddy, I would argue that you are much more educated than most economists out there. so
I certainly do appreciate it. I spend a lot of time doing research and trying to break down, the effects of what's going on in the economy. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
And we appreciate you joining us from your studio, which is your car with the fuzzy dice.
Yeah. I drive this old 99 Toyota Corolla around and had some viewers send me the dice a while back, and now they stuck. So I can't get rid of the dice. They do numerology with it. They use it to pick out their stocks and stuff like that. So I don't know. I can't get rid of the dice.
That's awesome. Well, no, this is your trademark. So it's super cool. And Simon, just for our viewers, you're located in Portland area, right?
Yeah, I'm outside of Portland. I'm up in the northwest corner of Oregon, a little town called Astoria.
So, Astoria is gorgeous. Yeah.
Astoria is a wonderful place. I really like it here. Old history, a lot of old architecture, and just, friendly place.
Good stuff. Well, it was fun sharing the stage with you a couple of weeks ago in Houston, and we did a panel discussion together as well after our speeches. And, you've just got a wealth of information, Simon. Lately, I know you've been talking about the Cantillon Effect and inequality getting worse and builders, how they are really in crisis because, with your background in the lumber industry, they are really, really pressured on these materials cost. And, where should we start? I mean, we could cover a zillion other things, but what's on your mind?
Well, why don't we just go ahead and dive into some of the building products that are going on right now? So to kind of let you viewers know that I do work at a retail hardware store, lumberyard. I do retail sales for a living. So when a customer comes in looking for a special order door, window, or siding or something like that, that's what I do. I track down all those specialty items. So lately, what I have seen taking place, and really, it was quite unexpected as we saw the lead time starting to increase on some of these building products. It became pretty apparent that there was no reversal to these lead times. Like, we thought, okay, so it's a month out. Well, that'll change. Then it comes 6 weeks. Then it became 2 months. And now here it is 3 months on a lot of these building materials that we used to be able to get inside of just a couple of weeks. So this is a new experience. This is something that, the builders never had to deal with. This is something the vendors really never had to deal with before. And it's creating a situation and making the environment of completing homes very difficult. And the main reason behind it is just the logistical nightmare behind it. Now, I like to use vinyl windows as kind of my example of the situation, in which that I used to be able to get a vinyl window in 10 days. Now it takes me 3 months. So when you think about somebody who is like going to, say, build a house or a spec home, and they're used to being able to have that home dried in 45 days from the time they get the permit to the time that they're sealed up, it takes almost 90 days to get the windows. So not only do you have to order the windows when you get the permit, you may have to order the windows before you even get a permit. And this is like something that has never been done before. I mean, people have never had to deal with this kind of logistical issues. So this is where I think a lot of the builders are going to be facing some crisis as far as just trying to get their projects completed. And the more difficulty that it takes inside of getting these homes completed, it's obviously going to start driving the prices up and the lead times out and just make the environment more difficult than it already is.
So you're saying that home builders really, to be able to get their projects done in a reasonable amount of time, they have to not do what they usually do first, which is they go get a permit to build a house or a tract of homes. They literally need to order the supplies before they even have a permit.
That's right. Yeah. If they want that thing to go off, I mean, obviously you can get a permit and sit on the permit and wait and go that route with it. but that's not typical. Like typically once you get the permit, you start moving and you start doing the project. You don't want to like, basically you're going to have to put the cart before the horse, right? I mean, This is where it's come down to. And that in itself is like trying to have the confidence inside of like, I'm going to get this job done, or even make sure that you can have the job. I mean, what if you order the windows and then you can't get the permit?
Yeah.
Well, now the windows are coming. They're on their way.
Well, those windows probably went up in value, so you could sell them on the gray market secondhand for more than you paid, I bet.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, I mean, some of the price issues are just incredible. Like, say for the same windows that I used to pay $180 for, or try and sell for $180, are now selling for $320. I mean, the prices are just, it's incredible on how much some of these things have gone up. Now, 2x4s, that was like an incredible story when they went from $3.50 at the low to $13.50 at the high. But that's a pretty volatile market. And right now we're looking at lumber prices at around, $1,200 per thousand. That puts your 2x4s at around $8, $8.50 a piece, which is incredibly high, but not nearly as high as the $13.50. So even that right there is going to start increasing the price of homes just inside of the building materials. I mean, I just don't see how there could be a reversal on the price of homes, or at least any kind of stabilization, if you continually having these prices going up as far as the building materials go.
Well, what's interesting about that is how sticky that whole system will be when things eventually start to correct, right? I mean, if they correct. But say, for example, we did see lumber prices go down and then they came back up again, but they were still net much higher than when the original surge began. And now we see them, back up again, right? So, but each component part of a home, each supplier tries to hang on to that margin. So even if their price declines, the price is sticky, at that point, right? So if they were able to charge $200 for the widget, whatever it is, whatever piece of the, pie that is for the home, right? And say, their cost when they were charging 200 was 130, right? Well, say their price goes down to 100, they don't really give up that price. That's just not the way things work. It's sticky until they're forced to cut their prices by a competitor offering it for less and stealing market share. And that takes a long time to work its way through the system, So I would agree with you that I don't see this changing very quickly or very easily, even if you do see some relief in these prices. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think probably because there is going to be a reversal at some point. I mean, at some point the prices just become too high and people postpone their projects, and then the buildup of inventory starts to take place, just like you said.
Right.
So at some point that's going to take place. But right now you're seeing the housing starts and the housing completions. You're seeing a widening gap taking place between those two. So until you actually see those two start to come back together again, or you start to see those completions start to rise and catching up with the starts, it's going to remain elevated. Everything's going to remain elevated as far as the prices go. But you're starting to see already kind of like even with the lumber prices, I mean, they are elevated quite extreme to like around the 1,200 per thousand right now. But it seems that inventory levels are starting to build out there. Like one of the things that I had noticed prior to the first run up to the 1,700 per thousand is that we had run out of pressure treated lumber in my yard. Like, I mean, we literally could not get 4x4 pressure treated. Right now, it seems that everything is available at a price. So if you really want it, it's out there. It might be expensive. Where there was a time it didn't matter how much you wanted to pay for it. It just simply wasn't there to buy. So right. there is a bit of a difference taking place now comparatively to what had happened before.
Okay.
But yeah,
very interesting.
But the inventory levels are tight right now, especially when it comes to the framing lumber. That a lot of that has to do with what happened out of the British Columbia area. They had got nailed with some pretty heavy storms this winter. And so the flooding knocked out a bunch of rails and highway systems. So the transportation coming out of that particular area has become very difficult. And On top of that, there is also some pretty heavy tariffs that are kicking in right now on the softwoods coming out of Canada. So that's going to push the prices up and keep them elevated for, until at least inventory levels build or more production comes online.
Yeah. So where is it most acute? Is the lumber the biggest issue? You use windows as your example, and I'm not quite sure why, but there's a whole bunch of components and parts that go into building a home. Do you have an opinion about where the problem is the worst in which supply chain?
I don't think it's anything that's any one particular item. I think they come and go as, like there was a few months back, I had a hard time locating fiber cement sidings. Now it seems like I have access to fiber cement siding again. Okay. And so a couple of months ago it was a problem. Right now it's not. I use windows as my main one because you need those windows to dry the house in. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of stuff that you can kind of postpone it. Like, if you don't happen to have the siding, well, at least you can still work on the interior. Right. You can still, finish the house off and then do the siding later or something like that. But without the windows, you're really kind of stuck. You can't dry the house in. And if those windows don't arrive, then you're going to have deterioration of the project. And anytime you ever have deterioration of the project, that's going to cost you money. And so I like using windows as my main component because it's kind of like almost comparing it to say the chips, the semiconductor chips for automotive or something like that. Right. Just this one little simple component can just really disrupt the whole thing.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, hey, let's switch gears for a moment if we can and talk about Richard Cantillon. Now, I've talked about him a lot on the show because he really pointed out some very interesting things. And this is from about 250 years ago. You just recently went back and read some of his essays, and you've done some videos about that, which are quite interesting. Why don't you share some of that with our audience?
Yeah. So the Cantillon Effect, or he was a French guy, so his name was pronounced Cantillon. So this Cantillon Effect, this is a lot of.
I like Cantillon better. I think that's.
I like Cantillon better too, and so that's how I say it is Cantillon. So this Cantillon Effect, when a lot of economists talk about it, they describe it as when new money comes into the system. When this new money comes into the system, the people who have first access to that money, they get to spend it at face value. Right. As that money enters into the system, it starts driving up the prices. By the time the people at the very end of the line who have last access to that money, by the time they get a hold of it, they're the ones who are facing the worst issue because they are having to pay the higher prices, but things like their wages haven't gone up. Right. So this is kind of like what a lot of people refer to as the Cantillon Effect or the Cantillon Effect.
Yeah. And so to put it another way, the people closest to the money benefit the most from the money. So this money, as COVID, really became an issue and there was that big stock market correction down, the central planners got worried. They started pumping the money, and guess who got the richest? All the people who were already rich, all the Wall Street people, the banksters, etc., because they had first access. So they could invest before the price cycle started, where you have this inflation of all these dollars chasing a limited supply of goods and services. And so they benefit the most. And it makes the wealth gap much, much worse, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so it does. And so what Cantillon goes on to describe is that there's more cause and effects that takes place from this, because really when this new money enters into the system, the people who get that money, they just because they doubled their income, they don't want to pay double the price. They want to continue to pay the same price with their newfound money. So what this ends up doing is it causes a foreign trade to start coming in to compete with the new higher prices that are taking place. When this new foreign trade comes in, now this starts to compete with the domestic manufacturing. So now what ends up happening is that it starts driving out the inhabitants, because the people who used to have a standard of living in this particular area where this new money comes in, now all of a sudden their standard of living is going down because the prices of everything has gone up. Mm-hmm. So now if they don't have access to this money, or they cannot increase their standard of living, they're going to go find that standard of living someplace else. So they literally leave that area. As this happens, less manufacturing taking place inside of that particular area, the newfound money, if it continues to pour in, will continue to seek out more foreign trade. driving out ever more of the inhabitants. So what you end up having is that the people who have the most money or have that access to the money, they're living a standard of living that is much higher, while the lower end of the inhabitants who are suffering with the higher prices and less money coming in, they end up moving down deeper into poverty or having to leave that area altogether. And this is where the inequality begins to grow. This is that wedge that starts to drive in and separating the classes out.
Simon, that's a really good point, because that almost, well, not almost, but it really does help explain the Rust Belt to some extent. It helps explain Detroit to some extent. And it also helps explain 1971 with Nixon's fateful move, and how I believe he knew that the inflation issue was going to rear its head in a very bad way. And I think in a way, as much as, I definitely have my qualms about Nixon, I think that's why he took his historic trip to China. And just about 7 years later, China opened up and the world changed. But that's exactly what happened, right? At first, a lot of cheap consumer goods come into our market, but then ultimately you displaced all those high-paying American jobs, all those union jobs, that were able to be just eviscerated with free trade agreements and globalization. And so that standard of living really did decline quite a bit for Americans, didn't it?
Absolutely. And what Cantillon described it is with a silver mine. The silver mine comes into a particular area and they start mining the silver and all this new money comes in. But he goes on to describe a lot of different ways that this new money can start coming into the system. And pretty much he says the end game is when you get a bunch of foreign money buying the government debt, and that government debt or that new foreign money is buying all the foreign products. So this is where does the new money come from? Well, it comes from the same people you're buying the stuff from. And so if that ever comes to a situation where that new money doesn't come in and they're not buying that foreign stuff anymore, there is no game to play. There is no manufacturing. There is nobody who's sending you stuff. And this is where he says everybody starts falling into poverty. Not to scare the hell out of everybody, but just something to keep your eye on,
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a new way to understand it, definitely. So back to the building and the construction issue. I mean, how do you see this playing out? What does the next year look like? What do the next 2 years look like? We've built this whole global economy around just-in-time manufacturing, just-in-time delivery. And as suppliers and businesses and factories came back online, I would have thought that this supply chain and shortage issue would have cleared itself up in just a few months. But really, a lot of the demand was so increased. And, what do? Can you increase your output by maybe 10%? Well, and if you have no standing inventory virtually because you're trying to be so efficient and cut cost with just in time prior to that, it takes a long time to catch up, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I kind of looked at because I was so close to the lumber industry, I just kind of thought, okay, what if the same thing happens to the rest of the economy that happened to lumber? Lumber had this huge shortage. Nobody could get it. There was all of a sudden this massive production of lumber taking place. It completely filled the inventory levels. And then all of a sudden, boom, there was a price drop again, after all these, after the inventory level was there, the curtailment started kicking in. So I thought, okay, well, same thing. Once the ships and the warehouses and the transportation lines and all that stuff frees up and all this stuff starts flowing again, we're going to start seeing the prices come back down, or at least not see the inflation scenario that we're experiencing right now. But that didn't happen. The supply chain didn't open back up again. And so now I think about this, it was just okay, so are we going to experience a forever shortage, forever, not being able to open up and then supply things like we once did before? I don't think so. I think at some point that would free up. Entrepreneurs want to make money and they can see where there's money to be made.
Right.
And if there is stuff sitting out there in a warehouse and there's people out there with money who want it, they're going to make that happen, And so at some point that scenario will take place. It seems that there's a lot of regulations and kind of forcefulness keeping this supply chain almost broken. right? To keep it from going back into the standard distribution like it used to be. A lot of that has to do with this employment thing. Like, how come we can't seem to get these people to go back to work like we once had before? Maybe part of that Cantillon effect, like these jobs just don't provide enough of a standard of living for people to accept that job again, to go back and do that kind of work.
Right.
I mean, that's a very questionable thing to kind of think about right now. But in the end, a lot of people are pointing their finger at the Fed, saying the Fed has lost control over inflation. So I have to wonder, is like, okay, so if the Federal Reserve does raise interest rates, does that fix a broken supply chain? I don't think it does.
I don't think so. Yeah. I mean, it cools off the economy. And so maybe it fixes it on the margin in that it decreases demand. Right. So, okay, that's not the way to fix the supply chain, but it's a way to hide the problem, right? If you just make demand curtail, then it'll look like the supply chain's better because there's just less demand on it, right? But that's not the solution, obviously.
It's not. Now, I know that the Federal Reserve has been stuck at this lower bound. They're at zero interest, lowering of interest rates is no longer a feasible thing for them to do. But yet they would really love to raise interest rates to get some of that ammo back. And how do you raise interest rates unless you have some kind of inflation scenario taking place? How do you get inflation to take place unless you sever the supply chain and you keep that supply chain broken? So I mean, I'm not the political one out there. I don't talk politics. I really, not into saying this administration does something different from the other ones or whatever. All I can say is like there is a lot of issues taking place with trucking right now that could be freed up if they had just allowed the entrepreneurs to go in there and do their job.
Well, the latest thing about that, by the way, they're now training teenagers to drive the trucks. It's pretty scary.
Well, at least they're training them to do something useful.
Just what I want. A 19-year-old kid driving a semi.
Well, what if it was like a drone? Like, if he was behind a computer, you'd feel okay about it.
Yeah, maybe. But I can imagine, heck, if I was a teenager driving one of those big rigs, I'd think it'd be pretty fun, but I'd probably be too reckless with it.
Yeah. You think about it, like most of this stuff has taken place down in California as far as the distribution issues, and it seems to me that they have a lot of regulations right now that could be freed up or allowed to at least have like some sort of moratorium on them to try and get the stuff moving again. But that's not in their interest,
Yeah. Right. No, California takes every problem and makes it 10 times worse. In fact, when you were talking about supply chain issues, I remember reading the story of a company in California that ended up moving to Texas, and they were manufacturing PPE masks, right?
Okay.
And when those were in total short supply, the state of California shut them down because they weren't making the mask the way they wanted to. They wanted them to. I mean, just unbelievable. It's something else. But the inequality picture, we talked about Cantillon and so forth. What do you think Simon has to give in this system? I think what has to give is standard of living. It's just simply going to decline in most cases for the widest swath of people. And that is a very sad state of affairs, but that's what has to give. Yes, maybe the shortages will get a little better. Yes, maybe the market will stop being so absolutely psychotic like it has been, and things will moderate a bit. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the standard of living has got to give, right? People are just going to accept a smaller house in a lesser neighborhood with fewer amenities, with lower construction quality. I think that's where we're going. Am I wrong?
Well, maybe by force, but not by choice.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right. Because even in Cantillon's, in his essay, he was saying there is nothing more pleasurable than to increase your standards of living, and there's nothing more painful than to take those things away. I mean, it would take a lot of pain that people would have to experience in order to fix it. I don't know if there's any fixing it. I don't think there is that. I mean, once you're kind of heading down that path, there really is no reversal to it. It's just what side of the wedge are you going to end up being on, and how you get there. I hate to be like the doomsdayer sounding kind of person, but unless you start going into more productions and saving and not so much debt and consumption, then you're not, there is no reversal to it. And so it's going to continue down this path. So like, again, like you got to be on the right side of that inequality wedge.
Right.
That's
on the individual level.
That's on the individual level.
Saving and reducing consumption. Unfortunately, though, we have a whole economy built on consumption, right? So if that happens, I mean, remember post 9/11, George Bush and all the rest, go out and go shopping. Oh my God, it's just
to try and jumpstart the economy. I mean, I related it down to beers and saws, and I thought this was a pretty good analogy. If you can imagine a bunch of debt being taken out and purchasing to either one or the other, beer or saws. And if you can kind of consider beer like a consumable item, there's agriculture, there's transportation, there's entertainment, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the consumption or the production of beer. Mm-hmm. But then on the other side, you got saws, right? It really doesn't do much. You purchase a saw, you use it a bunch of times. Eventually you can cut up some lumber, fasten it together, sell that product, and then eventually pay for the saw, right? So if you take a bunch of debt, right, like the stimulus money, and you give it to people and they go and dump it into beer, right? Yep. Well, essentially, you're going to drink up all that beer. Now you're going to have to postpone your consumption to pay for that beer.
Right.
But if you had taken that money and you dumped it into saws, well, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of the saws at first because you're going to have to cut up and work them for a while. But eventually you'll fasten those boards together, sell them off, and now you have something that's going into production. You could use those saws to buy as much beer as you want. Yeah. But right now we're sitting in a place where we spend all our money on beer and it's all gone.
Yep. That's the guns and butter right there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Simon, what else would you like to share with our audience? Just any question I haven't asked you, what you're thinking about, what you see in the future, whatever.
I think probably the biggest thing for people to probably keep their eye on is going to be the debt, is going to be the rising of the interest rates and what that's going to do to a lot of the corporate debt out there. The interest rates have been so low that has pushed a lot of people into the higher risk, right? So when you go into higher risk, that's a bigger chance to default. Well, as more people were pursuing that higher risk, going into like these junk bonds, these corporate debt, it started bringing that junk bond yield down, and it brought it closer and closer to the U.S. Treasury marks. And so now if there ever comes a situation where the interest rates begin to rise significantly and it starts pushing those U.S. Treasury yields closer to that corporate debt, then you're going to find a situation in which that corporate debt's going to start getting dumped. And then you're going to find places like, the things that you see like going on with like Evergrande in China, that sort of thing is going to start happening here in the United States. And that could be a very scary situation, considering that a lot of people's pension funds and stuff like that is tied up inside of these corporate debts, even though they may not even realize that their pension funds has invested into these high yielding debts.
Yeah.
So that to me would be something to be very concerned about. And then probably central bank digital currencies. I think that's probably going to be the biggest move to people's lives in the next 10 years or so. And they're probably not going to even realize that it happened. And that's probably going to be pretty scary. So central bank digital currencies and the interest rates would be like the two big things that I would keep an eye on.
You got a moment to just talk about the CBDC discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't know if you saw this, and I'm going to actually put it on the screen here. I don't know if you can see it where you are, but just for the viewers that are watching, what's interesting about this is they are actually doing a survey. The Federal Reserve, this is the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve website I'm showing right now, and this is a central bank digital currency feedback form. They want to hear from us, Simon. They want to hear from us, and they want to know what we think. Enter your comments below. 5,000 character maximum per question. What additional benefits, policy considerations, or risks of a CBDC may exist that may not have been raised in the paper? So they've got a paper on it. I'm sure you know about the paper that came out, right? And they're basically asking us what we think, which is interesting. Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to take off my negative doom and gloom conspiracy hat for a moment, which I completely believe in, but I'm just going to take the hat off for a moment.
Sure.
I think we have to have a CBDC as a country to remain competitive with other countries, because China is moving quickly to develop theirs. And if the dollar doesn't modernize, there is going to be further pressure on moving away from the dollar as a reserve currency. So as a nation, I think they do need to do this. However, sadly, it is not going to be for the liberty and freedom of mankind, because they're going to abuse it, and they're going to use it to track us, and they're going to use it to restrict us and restrict our freedoms and our movement, and really scary, maybe tie it in with a social scoring system like China has. So a lot of big concerns here, but I don't think we can do without this, honestly, from a national level, because between countries, this is part of what keeps our currency competitive with other currencies. Do you disagree with that or agree?
No,
or have you
I
thought
agree
about
with
it that way?
No, I've thought about, I've thought the good, the bad, and the ugly about central bank digital currencies. In fact, I was making videos talking about the central bank digital currencies even a couple of years ago, because I knew this time was going to come. There is very little doubt in my mind that we will at some point have zero cash in the system, and that everybody will be on a central bank digital currency for all their payment systems.
Yeah.
And it will be very much like you said, it's going to be, as far as like the doom and gloom thing about it, it is going to be tracking you, tracing you, making sure that every single bit of your behaviors are in line with what they want, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, most people probably aren't going to notice. And in fact, most people, for like the average person, they're actually probably going to end up getting benefited from it.
Yep.
And it's really only going to be the people who truly understand it, or, have like a possibility of losing skin in the game, because they have the skin in the game or whatever. Like, most people, like, if you don't have like a whole lot of money or whatever, you're going to get like, they'll just give it to you, like if you're in a natural disaster, it's going to just pop up into your wallets.
Right.
Or, the economy is going to turn down, and all of a sudden you're just going to have money that you can spend on food or rent or whatever. And so most people, when they start getting the first exposure to the central bank digital currency, they're going to love it. They're going to think it's just like the greatest thing ever.
I think to make it work, to sell it to the public, they've got to tie it in with a universal basic income. I just think those two are inextricably connected. And that when the first COVID stimmy checks came out, you saw the stories. They were all saying, oh, it's so hard to get the money to the people. We can't do it. Well, somehow you're able to tax the frickin' people. So I don't know, you must be able to give them some money back. It's ridiculous. But that was the setup. That was the narrative. They wanted to plant that seed over and over again to open the door for the CBDC and the UBI. Right. Yeah.
Now, when I first started learning about central bank digital currencies, it didn't have anything to do with the benefit to the people. Didn't have anything to do with, natural disasters or economic downturns or anything like that. What it had to do with was taking interest rates into negative territory. That's their ultimate goal for the banking system. The central banks, they know that if they were to try and take interest rates negative, especially when it comes to somebody's like bank deposit, like a lot of people who will think, well, okay, these other nations, they already had negative interest rates. And it's really there's a lot of different interest rates that you can look at. When things go negative, especially when you're looking at, like, say, sovereign debt going negative, it's really not necessarily the coupon rate that's gone negative, which is really kind of difficult for people to understand, is if they don't know what bonds are and what coupon rate is and what the difference between coupon and yield is. But ultimately, the coupon rate might still be positive. It's the price that bond sold for that now take that coupon rate into a negative yield. And so if you can kind of understand the difference there, then you would kind of understand what negative interest rates are on sovereign debt. most bank accounts out there don't really have like a negative interest rate attached to it, because people would just pull their money out in cash. It wouldn't make any sense to, take your paycheck down and then immediately have less money because you deposited it in a bank. Like that isn't even going to be something in the realms of possibility, and the banks know this. But if they were to take interest rates negative, that's what would happen. They would pull it all out in cash. So they know that they would have to have two currencies. They would have to have an e-currency, like this cryptocurrency or central bank digital currency of some sort. And then you would have the cash in the system, and you would call it two different things. I mean, it would have to be separated. As time went on, they would make it very difficult and burdensome to use the cash. They would charge you a deposit to put it in. They would charge you a fee to pull it out. There would be very few people who would want to use cash just because the bank accepting of it would be so annoying to them. And
so if I may, when I was in Sweden, the stores all had signs that said, "We don't accept cash."
No cash.
Last time I was there, it's no, card only, no cash. And you're seeing that in the US. I literally took my dog in for a bath on Monday, and the groomer had a sign, "No cash," because we don't have any change.
Yeah.
We can't get coins. So, if your bill is, $42.73, they have no change. So they're making a coin shortage in order to make it more burdensome to use cash. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And then also I just found that people, like, not so much now, but like over the last year, like a year ago, very few people, I work retail, so I do a lot of cash transactions. People backed way off on their cash transactions. Like, they didn't want to handle cash. They didn't want to interact with it. And I even had a guy hand me a $20 bill, and he had like $1.85 in change coming to him. He just said, "No, thank you." Yeah. He didn't even take his change.
And do you think that's because of the germs? Because that's another narrative they were pushing. I saw a lot of articles when COVID started about how the money is carrying the virus.
Mm-hmm. Right? No, that's exactly what he said. He goes, it might have COVID on it. So he just literally handed me the 20 and took his stuff and walked out. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, the stuff has COVID on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. The lumber you just bought.
I touched your stuff.
Yeah. That's funny.
But that's happened quite a bit. And then I had quite a few customers ask me if I took cash still. And I always have the same reaction when they ask me if I take cash. I say, "Yep, I take cash, gold, silver, Bitcoin, cut diamonds, and I'll even take treasury bonds right now."
I like the cut diamonds. I think that's pretty good.
I do too. I like it. Of course, synthetic diamonds out there, it's hard to take.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, it's just always a pleasure to talk to you. And do you have a website you want to give out? Of course, people can find your videos online, but a website?
Yeah, I'm pretty much active on YouTube, but I do have a website, uneducatedeconomist.com. Been trying to push my Instagram a little bit more, so I'm a little bit more active on Instagram nowadays. You could send me an email, uneducatedeconomist@gmail. But yeah, for the most part, I'm just kind of active on YouTube for the most part. So
awesome. Well, Simon Caron, the Uneducated Economist, thanks for joining us, buddy. And we love your stuff. Keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you, Jason, man. It's been a fun time talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.